Hi, how are you, mate? Yeah, there's a lot of Australians in the room. Good to be here. Sorry? Hello, how's it? Yeah. Good to be here and see everyone. My topic is 200 years of Hasidic thought. I nearly said 2000. This year I was in the bank and I said to one of my children who was standing with me, you know, this year is 3,334 years since we received the Torah. And this woman in the bank spun round and she said to me, you know how many years? I said, yeah, 3,334. I can tell you how old the world is too. She thought that was a novel idea as opposed to millions and billions of years, right? It changes things. And 200 years is not that long. It's about 8 generations. You and your Bobby, your grandmother and her grandmother and her grandmother pretty much takes us back to the memory of 200 years ago. But I don't feel that I'm equipped to share 200 years of Chassidut. What I can share is the impact of maybe what those 200 years have had on my life, who I am and how I've processed these teachings. We are taught in Kabbalah that when Eliezer, Abraham's servant, came to the place where his relatives lived and he was looking for a wife for Isaac, so Rebecca came to the well and she was drawing water from this well and giving it to the camels and giving it to him to drink. And the mystics tell us that she drew and fed those camels and Eliezer water that is the source, the mystical root of all the Torah that was taught for thousands of years, from their time all the way through to the time of the Baal Shem Tov. But that when Mashiach comes, there will be a different kind of teaching. And at that time, we will be taught from the underground aquifer, from the waters that are under the ground. Now, I don't know if any of you have drunk from a spring. Has anyone here? No. Yeah, well, are you from South Africa? No. Oh, okay. In South Africa, my dad used to hike in the Drakensberg Mountains, and in the place that we used to go, there was a spring that actually became a pond, but it was protected before it fed into the pond, and we used to drink from it. And I remember the first time that happened, that was our drinking water. When we came back to Johannesburg, I threw up just from drinking water, because it was so pure. The difference between water and water that's coming from the spring is very noticeable. How much more so, and we don't really know what this means, to say, I gain access to the water as it is in the underground wellspring. You'd have to go underground to get that, right? But we are told that when Mashiach comes, we are going to drink from the underground aquifer. And our Rebbes have taught us that the Baal Shem Tov ascended on high. One day, he had a mystical experience and he encountered Mashiach. And he asked Mashiach, when are you coming? And Mashiach answered him and said, when your well springs flow outwards. When your wellspring will come out to the whole world. And we are taught that what that means is that these teachings, these are those underground aquifers. It's like what Rachel was giving over at the well. There is this underground lake that has water, and that's what we begin to have access to. These teachings of Chassidut have to come out to the entire world. And I do believe that this consciousness, the entire world, has shifted because of these teachings. You know, I was speaking to a group of people the other day, and I told them I think that 9/11 changed things, and I think that Madoff changed things. The housing crisis. Just as someone who goes around and speaks, I see a difference. It's like, I remember after 9/11 thinking, well, at least the world will know. Now the world, it's a terrible tragedy, but at least the world will know. And what amazed me afterwards is that no one changed their position. We just became more clear about what our position was. But that's a shift. As it says in the book of Daniel, that in the times before the Messianic era, there will be a great clarification process. V'yizbaru, v'yizlabnu, v'yiztzarfu rabim. That things in the world will become more clear, and they become more clear to us. And that's not always comfortable as we become clear with who we are. And then I think that what happened with the housing crisis, I always used to wonder at the story in the Bible. There were 7 fat cows, and then there were these 7 lean cows. And how did that change? How was it so quick? I understand over many years they grew thin, but like that overnight, and then that happened. Everyone had money, and then the next day no one had money. It was just different, and it forced us to shift. I'm sharing this about the housing crisis and about 9/11 because there are shifts that happen in the world, cosmic shifts in the way that we think about ourselves, in the way we frame things. And one of the most fundamental shifts that happened was the introduction of Chassidut to the world. Now, in terms of Kabbalah, there are 5 levels of Kabbalah. The first is a book that was given to Adam in the Garden of Eden. It's called the Book of Creation or Formation, Sefer Yetzirah. But the highest and 5th level of Kabbalah comes with Chassidut. And that is a book that is called the Tanya. And Tanya actually, to me, my life is different. I don't know if I would be alive without Tanya physically, just be here in this body at this time. I don't know, because I'll share a little bit with you about my life and the impact of Chassidut on my life. This level changed reality for us, and I believe that much of the way that people speak today as common parlance has happened because of the Tanya. Not that we should be confused, and I really do want to say this clearly. Many people think that, it's mysticism and it's the same. Yeah, I've studied Buddhism and I've studied this or that. It's not. It's not New Age and it's not Buddhism. I would say this, it's very ancient and it's totally current. But it is not. It's both of those things. It's so cutting edge. It's so about my life today and what happened yesterday, etc., and what I can create for tomorrow. That's coming from the Tanya, but because it's rooted in very ancient wisdom. So I want to share something with you that I believe reveals this impact, because what I'm talking about is subtle shifts that happen cosmically over time, and then they show up in our lives, and they show up in our lives not in an abstract way, but in a way that in our conversations and the way we say hello or goodbye or do something in an interaction. That shows, because really, where do you live? Here. Like you have to put your location on Facebook, I think, or Twitter. I can't remember. I put where my thoughts are. I am where my thoughts are. And many people say, oh yeah, there's the secret and you can create your future. The secret before the secret is you are where your thoughts are. So if you're thinking about creating material abundance, that's where you are. You're in the bank. And if you're thinking about bringing Mashiach, that's where you are. You're with Mashiach. And I'm not saying money is not Mashiach. I'm not saying that it's not spiritual to have money. I want it, and I want a lot of it, right? Unashamed. There was a time where I was embarrassed to say I want money. No, it's really useful and comfortable. And comfort is really good for a mama, to be able to say it's okay. We can have abundance. So I'm not saying that you can't go after that and still be a spiritual person. Of course we can. But where are my thoughts are? You are where your thoughts are. Right now we're all physically in this room, but I don't know where we each are. And I see that the study of Tanya, the study of Chassidut, and even just being in the environment, drinking it in, changes us. So the other day, I was going out of town for a speaking tour, and I was going to be gone for 4 days. So my son, he's a real, oh, Torah Cafe, you're filming this, and what if his Rebbe hears? You'll have to edit this out. Or his Rebbe's such a nice person, I'm sure he'll just forgive my son. He says to me, Mommy, can I stay with you till you go? Which meant that he would have to get to school 15 minutes late. So I said, yeah, sure, you can stay with me till I'm walking out the house, till the cab comes to take me to the airport. So he gives me this big hug, and I said to him, Mendel, I love you so much. Sometimes I just want to melt into you. And he says to me, I know exactly what you mean, Mommy. He says, it's like you want to become one with someone that you love. And actually, that is the word one in Hebrew, echad, is the same numerical value as the word ahava, which means love. You really want to become one with that person. And then he stops and he goes back like this, and he looks up at me and he says, but if we were one person, we wouldn't have the pleasure of loving each other. 12. And then he says to me, I guess this is not supposed to be recorded, or some technician will be here shortly, but we'll attend to that. Huh? Oh, you need it? You can't hear anything? Oh, you can hear. Okay, I got you. All right, fine. Okay, fine. All right. So he looks up at me and he says, we wouldn't have the pleasure of loving each other. And then he says, like this, because I was looking down at him in total wonderment, like this child is just teaching me, And I look down and he says, like this, we wouldn't be able to look at each other. And then I understood why God created the world. That he could have just stayed one God, but we wouldn't have the pleasure of being in a relationship with our Creator. And that relationship is a real relationship. It brings challenges and difficulties, and there are times I'm punching my fists at the heavens and beating them on my heart. But I get to have a relationship with my Creator and look at my Creator, experience and love. And I realized my child is drinking in Chassidus. Where does he come up with these things from, with his ideas? Like when they were little children, that I have twins, he's a twin. One of them, we went to the beach and the sea was so wild. And one said, I was scared of the ocean, and his brother said, me too. I thought it was going to take us away. Me too. And there's silence. And then one of them says, but God is also the ocean. And that's coming from a 6-year-old. There were 5 or 6 at the time. What I'm saying is, there is a white fire in every conversation. It's between the lines. We don't know. And that white fire impacts the quality of our life. And we get access to that white fire through this body of mysticism, through this core tree of life, which is the Tanya. So I want to share 2 stories with you that happened in my life about the Tanya, and we'll move back and forth between more academic or cerebral thought and telling stories. So when I was a young girl, I at one point asked my mother, I went to an all-girls school. I didn't know any guys other than my cousin who was my age. And I asked my mother why I can't marry someone who's not Jewish. And she kind of freaked out that I was 14 and that I was going to marry out of the faith or something like that. And so she sent me to this winter camp where reading the Holy Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, on this very bleached grass in South Africa in the winter, I just realized God gave the Torah is true, so we better start living the Torah. And my sisters who were with me realized the same thing, because she figured she'd kill 3 birds with 1 stone. And we were all there, and we all came back and told her we need a new wardrobe because we need skirts, and the house has to be kosher, and we're going to keep Shabbos. And she was like, I didn't bargain for this, I just wanted you to keep the faith, you know. It's like, okay. Anyway, she got on board as well at a certain point. But I want to say this. For many years I studied the Torah and I kept the Torah, and I was in a lot of pain. It just, the pain was greater because I knew it was true, but it wasn't doing it for me. And now I was 18, and I used to ride my bike, and there was this mountain, it's called Sylvia Pass. I was riding this bike up, and it was raining. And I'm riding and exerting all my energy into these pedals because I had like pain. It's as if you put the anger and the pain into the pedals. You to pound the pavement. It's going to be different. And I had tears in my eyes. And I remember this wet, cold rain and the warm tears. And I just raised my voice to God. And I said, God, I know you're true. I know you exist. And I know you gave the Torah, and your Torah is true. But I don't know how to find my way in life. Please help me. Send me a teacher. Send me someone. And he sent me through a friend of mine to my teacher. His name is Rabbi Kesselman. And I went to a shir of Tanya. Now, I felt like a big traitor because it was, I was a member of B'nai Akiva, and I still love B'nai Akiva, Mizrachinex, my cousins, Gush Katif, etc., living in the Shtachim. Baruch Hashem. We're many tribes in our people, and I'm deeply attached to that part of my life and that part of me that is still here. But even though I had studied Rav Kook, somehow it wasn't enough. It wasn't doing it for me. And I came to this shir. Now, in that class, the class that Rabbi Kesselman gave, he barely spoke English. But you know what's interesting? When you communicate with someone who doesn't speak your language, you learn to communicate with parts of yourself you don't pay attention to most of the time. And when you listen to someone speaking a broken form of your own language, you listen differently. It's like if I went on tour in Israel and I was speaking in Hebrew on the tour, and pretty much we speak Hebrew at home. It was different giving lectures for 2 days in Hebrew, and I had to think with a different part of my brain. So I gave to people from a really deep place in myself. And sitting in that class, I couldn't understand all the words, but I did understand this. This is godly. This is divine wisdom. I was at university at the time. I had wonderful relationships with my professors. I was academically inspired and interested in what I was doing. But it was so clear that this was almost like there was no fundament. It began in someone's mind. And really what I began to realize is it began in someone's heart. Years later, I came across a commentator on Ethics of Our Fathers, the Ravid, and he says, these teachings of ethics, which is not law, ethics of our fathers, the difference is that ethics cannot be mandated. It's just about being a nice guy, right? Be a mensch. That's ethics. You can't command that someone say hello, but it's a nice thing to do. Send a thank you letter, nice thing to do. At the beginning there he says, well, it says that these ethics were given at Sinai. And he says to teach us that these also are from Sinai. These also are God's will for us, and they have not been composed by human hearts. Asher lo chibru milibam. People haven't intuitively come up with these truths. When I was on campus, I felt that no matter how sophisticated the understanding, so much of it was driven by subjectivity and dependent upon the person who was giving it to me, etc. And I sat in the Tanya class and I felt this is divine wisdom. It's the mind of God. And we are taught that Torah is God's mind and the mitzvahs are His desire. The commandments are His desire and His pleasure. But for the first time in my life, I felt I was encountering something completely beyond me. Completely. It's not like I could try and get it. This was out of the realm of my awareness. And it still is. Of course it is, because it's the mind of God, right? It's only by divine grace that God gives us access to His understanding, and that His reality can be held in a tiny little book, ink on paper. It's amazing. And I can open that up and I have access now to the map of my own soul. I understand myself differently. There were moments when I learned something in Tanya and there was this aha that was so big, I felt like I was exploding, like, whoa, okay, I get it. Wow. Now with that little shift, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, 1 degree can be light years away in the heavens. So one tiny shift of this elixir of life can change our lives. And I went outside, I sat in my car, and my experience was of being a sock that was turned inside out. Like my mind had just been turned inside out and I forgot how to drive, wasn't quite sure of my name. I mean, of course I knew my name, etc., but it was like, oh my, the whole world has changed. And I want to share another story with you, and I can't quite, at that time, I don't know how long after it was, there was an evening at my parents' shul where there were 3 different rabbis presenting, explaining what is their path in serving God and what the differences were. And I thought, that's great, I'm going to go. There were 2 other rabbis, and there was Rabbi Weinberg, who is an absolute genius and incredible shliach of the Rebbe in South Africa. We were, I must say, even today when I go and hear his teachings, it never fails to just open up a new window. And he sat there and he told a story, and he said there were 2 Jews who noticed a 3rd Jew who was characterized by what we call bittul, nullification of the ego. Now, many traditions, and in Judaism we have this as well, speak about the need to avoid arrogance and try and cultivate humility. But you'll find that amongst Hasidim, there isn't so much of a discussion about arrogant and humble as there is about yeshus and bittul. Yesh means there is. Egocentricity, the delusion that I exist separate from my Creator. And bittul is nullification of the ego. So Rabbi Weinberg begins to tell this story, and he says these 2 Jews noticed a 3rd Jew, and they said to him, how did you get to be so bittul? They noticed this complete absence of a sense of ego entirely. And he looked at them and he said, what's there to mevatel? What's there to nullify? They say to him, how did you nullify your ego so much? And he says, what's there to nullify? And I remember sitting there, I was 18 years old. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, or 19 maybe. This is a path. This is a real path. Because people here are coming at life from the other side of the curtain. And I see it showing up, like when my children say things to me, and I see that doesn't just happen. It's because we are living in this ocean of Tanya consciousness, of divine consciousness, of Chassidut. So I want to give certain specifics about how Tanya has changed my life, but I want to precede that by sharing the following. are you here to fix this up? Thank you. Appreciate it. Better? Yes. Okay. So when we, I said earlier, it's very old. Torah is very old and it's very new because it's so current and it's so applicable to our lives now. But it comes from the primordial Garden of Eden. And actually, in that garden, we know that there were two trees. There was a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that is the root, the source of the legal dimension of Judaism. And there was the tree of life, which is the primordial root of mysticism and of the Tanya that we are studying. So those two trees are two traditions that have come down to us. And the Torah tells us that when the Jewish people came to Marah, which was a place in the desert, they were leaving Egypt. It was called Marah. Anyone know why? From the water that was bitter, right? Mar. It was bitter water. They came there and they complained. The water wasn't drinkable. And, the default method was to point a finger at Moses. Like, why did you bring us out here? What's the problem? We could have just been slaves, working away, sweating and crying. Let's go back to the status quo and try and bash the visionary who's taking you out of your limitations, which we still do today, right? So they were complaining, and Moses says, okay, let's see, what shall I do? And God shows him a tree, and he takes this tree and he throws it into the water, and it became sweet. And the sages teach us, one of the opinions is that this tree was the tree of life. It was the mystical tree of life that God threw into the waters. And there we are told, Sham sam loy chayk umishpat. There God gave the people law and rulings. But it can also be translated, there God gave the people the principles of healing. That if you want to take the bitter waters of your life and sweeten them, there really is only one way, and that is to engage with the tree of life. When I use the methods that I use for coaching, I tell people there are 3 levels of healing. One is to deal with the symptom. So you have a headache, and you don't say, well, maybe I've had too much coffee, or I need some sleep, or, there are toxins in my body, open the window. We just take a Tylenol and try and deal with it that way. Now, I'm not putting down current medicine because my life has been saved because of conventional medicine, but it's great for dealing with the crisis in the moment. It doesn't help us deal with the cause. The deeper than going to the symptom is to go to the cause. And that would be, well, let's have a look. Are you eating right? Or is there stress in your life, etc.? So a lot of our healing work has to do with uncovering the cause. And therapeutic work has to do with that too. But tree of life work, or the method that I'm talking about, wants us to go back and uncover who you were before the wound. That is very different. Ask yourself. You see, that's the only way to really sweeten those waters, is to say, who was I before the wound? Can you remember? Someone just sent me an article. I don't remember what it was called, something like You Never Really Leave High School. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What is that about? And the person who wrote this article said a lot of research has been done on the impact of being a toddler on the rest of your life. But there's an enormous impact on based on what happens to you in high school. And they gave an example. It's known that men who are taller generally earn a higher income. But what they found is that if a guy was short in high school and caught up when he was 19 or 20, he is not as likely to earn the higher end income as the guy who was tall in high school. Because the way we are treated in high school has such an impact on our perception of ourselves. So we learn to see ourselves, if it's first through mommy's eyes and it's through our friends' eyes, etc., and then in high school, and all that social pressure. It's so painful. And I say to my clients, I want you to see yourself through God's eyes. Could you imagine how your life would be different if you looked at yourself through God's eyes? That's what the Tanya does. That's what Chassidut does. That's this tree of life that Moses put into the water. And there is a specific way that the sages are deriving the fact that this is a medicine of healing. There is another verse in the Bible that speaks about God placing the law, His Torah, in front of the Jewish people, Lifnei B'nai Yisrael. And the word that is used is sam. Sam, right? There the law was placed, or there God taught them the law. This word sam means to place, and it is spelt in Hebrew with the letter sin, like a fire with 3 flames going up, is sam. But you can interchange the letter sin and the letter samach in Hebrew because they have the same sound. So a samach is around a circle. What does the word sam with a samach mean? Drug, right? Like today in Hebrew, modern Hebrew say samim, right? Which would be drugs, like street drugs, but sam actually is a medicine. So the Talmud says, one of the sages says, the significance in this is that the Torah can be sam ha-maves or sam ha-chaim, a poison of death or an elixir of life. Now, isn't that strange? Imagine I take 2 cups and I say to you, you know, this one is a poison of death and this one is an elixir of life. Choose life. Do I have to say that to you? Not at all. But God says to us in the Bible, I've given you today life and death, a blessing and a curse, so choose life. Why does He have to tell us that? Why does God have to say, choose life? And the question that we have is even deeper. This is saying it's one Torah, and the Torah is 2 things, 1 cup, and it's poison or death. So I want to hear from you. Why would it be? Yeah. What's your name? Meira. Shalom. Ma shlomech? Okay, great. So that's one take where Meira is saying that you have to go through the bitterness in order to access the sweetness. A great example is onions, right? I mean, they kind of sting to eat raw, but when you cook them, it's like a candy. So that is one example, that we might feel it's a little uncomfortable to keep the Torah, but ultimately it's something that is going to be very beneficial for us. Yeah.
Because of our instincts, we have the proclivity to do or excess, and those same instincts can further life. So, I mean, I would use the example of an overeater, a compulsive overeater. God has given us food for life, and so we can be healthy, and so we can do His will. But then in the same, the double-edged sword is we could also hurt ourselves and become obese.
Okay, what is your name?
Allison.
So Allison's saying something very deep, which is that anything that we do in life can show up in one of 2 ways. I actually have on my blog, it's called a series of articles called The 7 Habits of Transformation. That is goes according to the 7 spheres that the Alter Rebbe speaks about in Tanya, the 7 core 7 emotions, and how to work that 7-step program kind of thing. And in one of those articles, I speak about the fact that there is no way that we are going to get away with not feeling one of the feelings. You will feel every feeling that there is to feel. It just depends on what you do with that feeling. So you will feel small, but are you going to feel insecure and low self-esteem in relation to another person, or are you going to feel small in the face of your Creator? Or are you going to feel jealous of the wrong thing or desire for the wrong thing? Or are you going to just yearn for God? You know, can't wait to get that prayer book open, like, oh, you know, that's what I need kind of thing. So yes, we can take things one way or the other, and that's really what the teaching is telling us, that it can be life and it can be death, and the right amount of something is fantastic and a little bit too much can kill you. But what impacts that? What makes the difference? Yeah.
We have the of sheet, we have the liberty of the choice. You have something as the electricity, you can it's dangerous if you put your finger on something, but it's useful too. So you have the choice to use it in the positive manner or negative?
Right, of course, it's our choice. But I want to suggest something, and that is this. The way I taste the Torah, the way I process the Torah, has to do with my ego. Really, that's the biggest influencer in our life. Like the other day, a friend of mine was coming over to my house and she wanted to say something, you know, she's texting me like, I'm going to be there soon, I'm in my way. And I thought, oh yeah, you're in your way, you're on your way, honey, which one is it, you know? But it came to me because I think that so much about myself. I'm in my way all the time. That's really the biggest problem in our life, is I'm in my way. And when I work with people, what I see is we don't listen to each other. We can't, but we say the problem is communication, but we can't communicate because we don't know how to listen, and we can't listen because we're in our way. We can't really listen because what you say might offend this part of me, which let's call it the ego, but the ego is not the animal soul, but let's say the delusion of existing separately from God, and that part of you does not want you to be right. And that's why the sages tell us no one can attain Torah unless they're willing to die for it, because a part of you has to die in order to live. It's not going to happen. If you're not willing to let that part of you go, you can't live. And that's what we see in the story about the bitter waters, that there is this tree that turns bitter into sweet, that life and death and blessing and curse, they're just intimate. They're one side of one thing. And the determining factor over there is really us, who we are, and how I'm approaching my life. So if I come at a relationship in a Hasidic state of mind, it would be really, there's nothing other than God. And I exist only because He's bringing me into being in this moment, and I have nothing to fear. I can afford to be wrong. And if you can afford to be wrong, I promise you your life will be so much better. If you could just give yourself permission, and you know what, folks, I'm speaking to me and you're just listening in, okay? If you could just give yourself permission to be wrong, life's okay. It's all right. It doesn't matter. We're big enough to fail. That's one of my isms. And that makes a big difference. And how do you get to that? When you find who you are before the wound. That's powerful. It's different from saying, I want to go back to fix up the problem. Yes, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for therapy and there isn't a place to explore. A lot of this exploration will involve going back to when I was a child or when I was in high school, etc. But much of it has to do with uncovering the soul. You know, one of my other isms is I say to people, don't be new, be you. Right? You don't have to become, doesn't that free you up? Doesn't that make you relaxed? I don't have to become anything I'm not. All I have to do is remove the rubble and manifest who I am. Now that is refreshing. And that's what we get when we begin to focus on saying, I want to find who I am before the wound. I want to live a different kind of life. It's not in battle. I don't want to be the warrior. I want to dance. And I want to interact in a way that is non-threatening. I don't want to feel from you, and I don't want to give that to you. So that is the tree of life. And I can tell you, and I see that there were some questions. I'm going to leave time for questions. I just want to share a couple of insights that I or friends of mine experienced through Tanya that was just remarkable. One of them was the notion of two souls. You know, we grow up and we think there's a body and a soul. And that's complicated enough, and my body is fighting my soul. But the truth is there's two of me in there, and there's much more of me in there, and I call it tribe work. You have to learn how to work the inner tribe. You know, it's like there's so many of me in there, and you open up, Tanya, and I have a friend, she went through, the whole hippie scene, and she says, the first time I learned about the godly soul and the animal soul, I had so much peace, because after that, when the voices came up, I didn't think I was mad. You know, if you think there's only one soul and one body, then when you really want to forgive someone, but you can't, you understand. And you know what else the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that is just amazing? He says, when you're living your life in a way that you feel is falling short of the way you should be, does anyone feel that ever? Okay, it's like, all right, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 10 p.m., you catch me on any given day, there could be those thoughts. And the Alter Rebbe says, turn to God and say to God, you made me. I did not make myself. Like, all right, this is what you made. And I'm trying to work it. And he says, you can celebrate the challenges that God has given you. God gives us challenges, and he makes some of us very stingy by nature. If you look in the code of Jewish law in not chapter 32, it's called the attributes a person should try and acquire. And it says there are many different kinds of people on a full spectrum, from people who can't hold on to money and people who can't let go of money. And what's the middle path? Charitable. Charity is not the opposite of stingy, right? We all have these different personalities. What's the opposite of depressed? Cheerful, happy. No, not according to the code. The opposite is frivolity and lightheadedness. And happiness is just the middle path. Different, right? Different approach. But we are all along that spectrum. And the Alter Rebbe says, well, if you were created, which one? Pick your deficit, right? There's a whole host of them. I'm stingy, or I'm short-tempered, or I'm arrogant, or I'm, quick to anger, or etc., morose. Any one of those shortcomings, well, we have to say, God, you made me, and you gave me this challenge, and in this moment, I'm just going to keep pushing it away, and thank you for the opportunity to serve you by resisting my lower self. But I don't have to get hooked up in I'm a bad person. I can speak for that part of me and not from that part of me, and say, yeah, there's a part of me which finds it really difficult to forgive or to give charity. Whatever it is for any one of us. But that is not the whole of me, and I have another part of me. And that's so liberating. The Alter Rebbe gives us that. Other things that just come to my mind, and I want to leave time for us to take questions, but I remember reading, the Rebbe says, if you've got in chapter 34 of Tanya, 34 is Lamed Dalid, and backwards it spells the word Dal, which means poor. He says you're poverty stricken. You're in a place where you have absolutely nothing, right? It's just my life is materially or nachas or health, whatever. I just feel like I don't have it all together. And he says, you know what you have in that moment? You have the ability to do a mitzvah. Remember that since the destruction of the temple, God's presence cannot be found in this world other than through law. We're very into the mystical, but if you're not into the legal, you'll never hold on to the mystical. The tree of life needs the tree of knowledge to give life. Don't forget that, right? So I need that legal aspect, and God dwells in the halacha, in the law. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? I could have nothing else in my life, but in this moment I know that I can bring the divine presence into the world by by doing something holy, by calling my mom and saying hi, I'm honoring her, by going to visit a sick friend, whatever it's going to be, opening up and saying a chapter of Psalms. At any moment I have access to ultimate purpose. Now that also, these are tiny little things that change our lives. I have experienced them to be life-changing and seen that they are for others. I want to share one last idea, and really every chapter of Tanya is so life-changing. I can look back and see how my life shifted through the years of studying this tree of life. In chapter 41, backwards, chapter 41, in Hebrew 41 is Mem Aleph, and backwards it spells the word aim. And in that chapter, the Rebbe speaks about separation anxiety. So anyone who has learned about separation anxiety understands that at a certain point, a kid just is terrified of losing access to their mother and the love of the mother, and they'll do whatever the mom wants, so just to keep the love of their mom. But here he says, it's like we were saying, Alison, right? So I said earlier, there's no feeling that you're not going to have, so you may as well have holy separation anxiety rather than stifling separation anxiety. And what is that? He says, it is the fear in love, which is the fear of losing access to the one that you love. And that is God. I love you so much, God. I don't want to lose access to you. And if I don't want to lose access to you, I better do what's right and abstain from what's wrong. Because that's your will. I don't want to infringe. I don't want to compromise our relationship. So these are just a couple of thoughts which for me, certainly I can say it's 20, 40 years, but not 200 years. But at some level, our whole life is just reflecting that course of history where other people have gone before us and paved the way for us. As we taught, we are midgets on the shoulders of giants, and we could see further. We have to know I'm a midget, but I'm on that shoulder, and what is available to us is those sweet waters that have been sweetened and healed by the tree of life, and that we ourselves can heal. And I end with a blessing. God should bless us that we experience true healing. And with that comes the full revelation of Mashiach immediately in our time. L'chaim. So we have time for questions. Yeah.
I have a question about something that you talked about healing, and you said something about that the best way would be for us to go to who we were before the wound has been inflicted. And so many of them has happened when we were children. Majority between 2 and 5 years of age. Some experiences that each one has experienced. We were not able, we didn't have the skill to identify back then who we were. So how can one go back?
Okay, that's a great question. The question is, how can I go back before the wound if I don't remember who I was before the wound and I couldn't identify who I was at the time of the wound? Is that correct? To know who you are before the wound, you have to open up the Tanya. That's who you are before the wound. That's what I'm saying. Meaning, you don't have to go back to the actual moment. I'm not saying that one should not have therapy. I want to give you an example,
I
okay?
agree.
Okay, I just want to clarify that because I'm not saying that. I was attacked in my parents' garden in South Africa and beaten up by someone, and he pulled my thumb out. But the first place that, thank God, I managed to fight him off, the first place he attacked me was on the shoulder. And what happened after that is that whenever if my child touched me or anyone, I got a terrible fright, and I saw that even though I thought I had dealt with it, I hadn't. And I began a form of therapy called EMDR, which is just amazing. It was discovered and developed by a Jewish woman. I think it stands for Eye Movement Disassociation Rehabilitation. But what I found it to be very healing because it took me to that place so that I could get that wound out of my body. It's almost as if it was embedded in the body and I needed to get it out. But there are other wounds that are, we don't necessarily know what the moment was. And we may not attribute it to the correct moment. We may think it has to do with when I was 3 and it has to do with when I was 13, as I was saying, with this new research that's coming out. It doesn't matter that much for you. In this context, in this method that I'm talking about, or that I'm really referring to the Tanya and Chassidut, is saying, at any given moment in time, the perfect you is right here. And if you like, I know it's not so good for the filming, but we could do a little meditation before we end. And that's one of the things that I teach is meditation practices. Just to help you get in, we'll do a tiny little breath work thing. But just to get in touch, that means, like I said before, you don't have to be new, you just have to be you. That part of you is right here now. And you don't have to go find her. Mostly it's about being still. So what I'm saying is that finding who you were before the wound doesn't necessarily mean I have to go back on the route that I followed after I was wounded. So think about it like this. Living my life, wound. And then live this very jagged path, right? Frantic. Reactive life. Chaos, hectic, unmanageable. And, on my website it says from unmanageable to unimaginable. How are you going to do that? You don't have to go through that unmanageable path back to there so that you can... No, you just, boom, short circuit. You can short circuit by praying, by really paying attention to what the Tanya says. It's describing who you are. And really, really, at the bottom of the barrel, if you scrape everything away, what do I take? That the Alter Rebbe is telling me from the mind of God, you are part of the Creator, not part of the creation. That is very different. And when you have that, you can find that in a moment. And when you have that, then you come back at your life. It's like you're re-entering through a different doorway. You're coming at it from a different place. So what I'm saying is you don't have to go back upon that same route. When you learn the map of your soul and you learn about chapter 18 of Tanya speaks about the descent of the soul. I'm really talking about discovering your soul. That you don't think that you are a body with a soul inside of it, but you really experience yourself as a soul that is living inside of your body for a period of time. As the Zohar says, the body is the skin of a snake. And if anyone has seen a snake shed its skin, you understand. We just, we shed our skins when the time is right. But you are you, even if you shed your body. So that's the way, that's what I'm talking about, is find the part of you, that divine, infinite part of you that's here right now. Another question or comment? Yeah.
If you've never dealt with the Tanya before, like properly, and you wanted to get started, what would be the best way to get started?
What would be the best way to get started with the Tanya?
Obviously you can go into a complex book. I mean, You need to start at a
Right.
basic
Okay,
level.
I'll share something, but you wanted to say before.
What I started was there's videos on Chabad.org, and every day they have a different video of the chapters.
It's a video or an audio? It's an audio. Oh, it's both?
They have
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, Alison said that on Chabad.org there
a
is...
daily study of Tanya, and it's a video or an audio, and the rabbis teach you. Tanya. It's great.
There is, I don't know if your local JLI chapter may offer a course that was written by Rabbi Shais Taub for JLI called Soul Maps. It was an amazing course. It was 6-week course that took people through the whole of Tanya. And what's great about that course is that you begin to see the methodology and the structure behind, so that when you come back and you study the individual chapters, then it makes sense to you, because they are grouped together in very definite sections. But in addition to that, and I say this, I don't mean that we don't need teachers. One of the meanings of the word Kabbalah is the word lekabel, to receive, that we are receiving a tradition. It's an oral tradition, and just like you can't learn to be an acupuncturist or a doctor without going through your internship, you have to learn this body of teaching from people who have received it, from people who have received it all the way back to the Garden of Eden. That's how we have it. I mean, it's coming to us from that garden. So bearing that in mind, I do also want to say that it's very useful just to sit with a text and read it. It's available in English, and see what your own response is to it. What does it bring up? I have a Tanya. It is now, I can't use it anymore because it fell apart and I lost some pages. It was given to me by my very good friend Bracha, who brought me to Rabbi Kesselman in the first place. And I have my notes. I was 18 and writing in that book, and I am amazed at what I wrote. Like, it was almost inspired. I think to myself, how did you write that when you were 18? How did you think that? Where was that coming from? I forgot all about it, and maybe 20 years later refound that, but then see it in the notes. So I really encourage you to sit and just read the book. And then there is another book. It's called Lessons in Tanya, and Rabbi Weinberg, whom I mentioned to you, I think he translated that from his father's book, Oliver Shalom. His father wrote a book which is a commentary, a line-by-line commentary in Tanya. And what's nice about that book is that you can read it in the standard text, and then the additional commentaries in italics. So if you just choose to skip that out, then you would read the text. Though I would recommend you get two. If you want to just read the text, buy a standard Tanya. They're beautiful translations. And if you want to read it with the commentary, do that. So those are a couple of different options. Yeah.
If I may just ask, this course you were talking about, Soul Maps, there is a book that has been issued. I mean, for each of those GLI classes, there is a book, so you can maybe find it as well.
Yeah, I just don't think that book makes much sense on its own. It's just excerpts of the Tanya. Yeah, it's just excerpts of the Tanya, so it's not that useful for that one. Any other questions, ladies? Yeah.
I just think that when we talk about slowing down and taking the time to be good to ourselves, that reading the book on the Tanya and listening to your story just slows our, like you say, meditation and stuff. I'm a motivational speaker in Canada, and it's such a wonderful, just that you're reiterating what I think all the time, that it's important to slow the brain down.
Right.
Because on a day-to-day basis, we're just rushing around all the time.
Yeah.
So I just really enjoyed it.
Thank you for that. We speak about the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet, and in the Tree of Life, there's the right side, the left side, and the middle. I speak about sugary, salty, and watery people, because water is like that central pH, and then you've got the sugar and the salt on the sides. And we are so sugared up. We are so spinning as a culture. It's just, I have a recipe. I almost never bake. or maybe 3 times a year. I love to cook, but I hardly bake because I just don't know how to do the substitutions and make it healthy and the mod and no. So I look at the recipes, South African recipe books and American recipe books. We know, my daughter knows, when you're going to make an American cake, cut the sugar down by 1.5 times. 1.5 times. So it's standard. You never put in, it's just, that's the rule, cut it down, boom. And why am I saying this in response to your comment is because we're spinning from our diet and multitasking. People tell me you're impossible to reach. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't multitask anymore. I did it and I got sick. And I don't do that anymore. And when I'm on the phone, I have time during the day that I set aside to be on the phone. I will return your calls at those times if I can. And I'm not going to do it, but we're doing so much at one time, and it's all like this. And then what happens is that we don't find who we are right there. We're right there. We're just waiting to show up. Like, we'll do this meditation in a minute, and you'll see, we just come right back. But we have to quieten on the outside. Okay, one question before we do the meditation. Did someone raise their hand over here? No? Yeah.
I want to share one thing that I've heard, that EGO stands for easing God out.
Right. Not only easing him out, like maybe just shoving him out. Yeah. It is that, I call it the curtain of cosmic amnesia, and that comes from chapter 18 of Tanya, where what you see there is that the Alter Rebbe speaks about the journey of the soul from its source into this world, and that as it journeys down, it forgets. It forgets who it is. And our work in this lifetime is to remember who we are. As the Holy Baal Shem Tov says, memory is the key to redemption.